Good morning. It is 8:32 a.m. on Friday, the 13th of March, 2026, and I'm sitting in my tent and I'm trying to work things out in real time. So I thought, typically for me, rather than, just having this thought loop that kind of is unproductive, I thought I would go ahead and just talk about what's going through my mind and see if we can come to some more concrete conclusions. I've got my coffee, and I slept at like 4,000 feet last night, so certainly not a warm night, Did not inspire confidence for the Smokies at all. Because, the Smokies, I was just looking at the topography and where the shelters and where the tent spots are located, and, the thing about the Smokies is that you have to, hold on, excuse me, you have to camp in designated spots. You're not allowed to just do what I did last night, which is find your own campsite and then just stay there, They have a reputation to keep in the Smokies of more pristine wilderness, and so everything is a lot more controlled and regulated. And, like I said, I don't really have a lot of confidence in my gear at this point because I don't think I would be warm enough in the Smokies. It seems like there's going to be a cold snap and some snow on Monday and Tuesday of this coming week. And to be honest, I don't think I want to do that just because, I guess the compounding factor here, because, in years past, what I did with the Smokies was just, I finished it in 2.5 days or something like that, maybe 3. It was probably like 3. It's a 76 mile segment of the trail, and, you're above 4,000 feet for most of that. And I've certainly been in the Smokies when it's really, really cold. Like when I was training for the Appalachian Trail in 2022, I would pretty regularly go out to the Smokies because I was living in Asheville at the time. And it was an easy place to get to, and I would always get my money's worth because it was really hard out there. And there's a lot of auxiliary trails that you can connect to the Appalachian Trail and with the Appalachian Trail to make loops and stuff like that. And I certainly spent some time out there that was frigid, But the compounding factor in this situation is that I'm not sure if I might be getting sick a little bit. In my research into the weather, I also noticed that the pollen levels are really high for trees right now. And I'm not sure if I'm actually allergic to trees per se. I probably am to some degree. I know I got an allergy test when I was a kid that was a little traumatic. Mom, shout out to my parents. You'll probably remember they had this matrix of little shots that they put. I think they tested me for 100 things. So, it was 25 little pricks on my back at a time that they did in these small squares, notebook LM. If you're familiar with this tactic, please tell me what it was called, because I'd be curious to know its actual medical name. But, you get pricked with a bunch of little things, and then you can see if you develop hives, basically. And I certainly was allergic to a lot of the basic common stuff like dust mites and trees and bushes and stuff like that. So I'm not sure. I could just be having allergies. Shout out to my mom. But certainly for the past 2 nights now, the first night I didn't even think about talking about it because I was just well, maybe it's a one-off, but I woke up with a kind of a scratchy throat that just kind of felt not like glass was in my throat, but, every time I swallowed, it felt scratchy, and it was hard to, feel good in my throat and go back to sleep. And it doesn't help that it's really, really cold. Maybe I'm getting soft. But this condition has left me with a couple of options. Not all of which I would say are on equal footing with each other. Option number 1 that I'm considering is to hike back to the NOC. You can, well, I shouldn't say, there is a unofficial tent site over there, and you can basically stealth camp right close to the NOC on something that they call Hobo Island, which sounds charming to me. And who knows, maybe I can meet some friends there. So walk back to the NOC, which would be, 5 miles, pretty much all downhill from here, and go back to 1,800 feet. And basically have a Nero today, kind of just reassess myself, my health, my logistics, and everything like that. But the way that I see it, my options basically are going to be dictated by whether I go a little bit farther north. It seems like I could go 9 miles north to Stokoa Gap, and then I'd have the option to go to a bunkhouse for $35 a night. And then just kind of evaluate if the Smokies are going to be something that I could do. I honestly, with the weather that's coming in and the 2 nights that I've had, I feel like unless I got this is not practical, but I feel like the only way that I could be comfortable would be if I had like a 4-season tent and a 0-degree sleeping bag, because I think the high on Tuesday is 24 and the low is 12. And that was at the highest shelter in the variety of shelters that I could choose from to see the weather forecast for. So it was at 5,900 feet or something like that. So I don't even know if I would end up staying at that shelter, but it gave me a general baseline. And also the fact that they're supposed to get snow, I'm not feeling comfortable going through the Smokies. It's regrettable that I bought my Smokies permit yesterday, because now my thought is, again, I'm out here to hike my own hike, and there are other options that don't involve going through the Smokies. So if I go south back to the NOC, my thought is that I would actually road walk from the NOC. I would take today off, basically, 5 miles in the tank. And then tomorrow I would road walk towards Cherokee, North Carolina. And then kind of skirting up the I-40 corridor, but not on I-40, go to the end of the Smoky Mountains and then jump back on the trail there. I'm not entirely sure how much of the weather I would avoid, but if nothing else, I can do more research and kind of get an idea of how much elevation I could go down from the Smokies. I'm sure it's a pretty precipitous downhill from the intersection over close to I-40, I would feel better about that for sure. And the Smokies, it would be a bummer to not go through them, but I think it's probably better to rip this Band-Aid off sooner rather than later, because I think I've mentioned, maybe not on the podcast, but certainly to other people, that my whole intention for this trip is to walk to Maine, primarily using the Appalachian Trail, but not necessarily exclusively using the Appalachian Trail. I just, at least at this point, it's more advantageous for me to avoid the Smokies, especially if I am getting sick. This is a lot of fear logistics. I don't want to be under the weather and not be able to move through that terrain as well as I might otherwise be able to do, just because that could be not even really dangerous, but it could just be really uncomfortable. And I don't mind being really uncomfortable, but I do have some standards, So that's kind of where I'm thinking with that. That's where I'm leaning, because, again, the NOC being down at 1,800 feet, it almost sounds like a bit of a vacation. The past 2 nights have just been really, really cold. And last night was even colder than the night before. And so, just trying to reasonably think about what would be the best time, especially since I'm not trying to be any kind of Appalachian Trail purist or anything like that. And then the other option would be just to, keep going north and, try to wait out the storm. I really don't want to stay put anywhere unless my symptoms get worse. And if they do, then I'd want to be closer to something that would be able to, somewhere I could go inside and actually be out of the elements while recovering. I don't really think that is a huge part of the equation, because I don't think that I'm going to end up feeling terrible. If this is a sickness, I think I have an idea where I might have gotten it. And the person who I might have gotten it from, they didn't seem like they were miserable, but it certainly is a bit of an energy suck. And having an energy suck going through the Smokies in really cold weather, I would say that that could be dangerous, and just like not something that I want to do, especially if there is a reasonable alternative. And as I learned when I did the Trans-America bike route and biked on the interstate for the first time, if there is no other reasonable option, then road walking is a good way to go. I could cover more ground, it would be at a lower elevation, and hopefully it would be more pleasant overall. I think it's about the same distance to walk around the Smokies, 70-ish miles, so I could do that in like 4-ish days, and I would be going through towns and have more access to resources. So I would feel good about that. The funny thing to me is that I had some family who was possibly going to come visit me in the Smokies, and I was just like, ooh, I don't know. The Smokies can be a lot, especially here in like late winter, early spring. And even myself now being on the, front doorstep of the Smokies, I'm just like, man, I don't even know if I want to do this. Like, it's just going to be really, really cold. And, once you're in the Smokies, there's really only one easy bailout point, which is like halfway through at Gatlinburg, right off 441. I don't really want to be in a position where I'm like crawling to that intersection, which I don't think I would be. But again, we've got fear brain here making noise, and so I'm trying to address that in a way that is reasonable and logical, while still addressing the emotional component of it too, which is just fear. So that's kind of where I'm sitting. I'm certainly leaning towards the NOC plan, and then road walking. By and large, I don't want to miss large portions of the Appalachian Trail. Like, if the Smokies, if we were still having reasonably warm weather, like, I don't mind sleeping in the 30s and stuff like that. But the combination of very, very cold, the precipitation, the possible snow, and the fact that the bailout points are limited, I just don't really feel comfortable with that. Not with this gear, I've never had a 4-season tent, and maybe a 4-season tent is really not necessary for what I would be doing, but I definitely don't think that my sleeping bag, which is also 4 years old, I don't think that it's up to the task. It's technically a 10 degree, I think, or 15 degree, what is it? I think it's a 15 degree bag, but there's no doubt that the loft is a bit compromised. I tried washing it at my parents' house to hopefully restore some of its loft abilities, but even last night, I wore every article of clothing I have, and I wore socks, and, I had all of my hoods up on all of my jackets, and including my mummy bag hood, and I basically had to stay under. I was inside my bag all night long, and still a little bit cold, just a little chilly, not so much that it was any kind of a problem. But again, fear brain talking. I am only at 4,000 feet, so this is only an indication of what will be. And you can sleep in the shelters and stuff like that, but as I witnessed yesterday, shelters, just because you're in a shelter doesn't mean that you're actually sheltered, and there is supposed to continue to be some pretty powerful wind going through the area, and so there's always a chance that that wind blows directly into the shelter, and you have absolutely no protection from it. Like with my tent, I do like that I can set it up, and I have a couple of layers, even if they are just thin nylon, or polyurethane, as it might be. Like that provides, at least a bit of a windbreak, but I have certainly slept in shelters during storms where the storm is actually just blowing directly into the shelter, most notably Woods Hole. Woods Hole is a shelter, I think it's the last shelter before Blood Mountain, that isn't Blood Mountain itself proper, because there is technically a shelter up there as well. But Woods Hole, I remember I was in like a 30-degree sleeping bag, a synthetic sleeping bag. This is like the first time I was ever on the Appalachian Trail, and I barely slept at all that night. It was so cold for the entirety of the night, and the wind was blowing into the shelter, and I think it was maybe raining. I don't even remember. But it was pretty miserable. As soon as we got to Neal's Gap and Mountain Crossing, Neal's Gap? That's not Neal's Gap, but Mountain Crossing. I immediately bought the sleeping bag liner that I still carry with me, and I wouldn't have cared if it was like $1,000. Like, I was like, man, that was so bad last night. I can't ever do that again, especially going through an area that actively sells you things that will help you be more comfortable, So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting now. I like the idea. I've been out here for 14. I guess it's been 14 days. Is that right? I left on the 1st. So, yeah, I haven't. Oh, it's the 13th. I haven't really taken a break per se, and I think the timing of both feeling possibly a little the beginnings of being possibly under the weather and the weather itself, I like the idea of going back to NOC and just like kind of taking a chill pill, my dude. And yeah, it was otherwise a very nice night of sleep. It felt, pretty restorative. I think I did wake up around 3, but it was so cold that like I couldn't do anything. So I didn't really stay up very long. I was just like, man, I would turn over a little bit. But as soon as I was on my side, like I would compress all of the down, and I just got really cold. I think I did blow my nose real quick. Hold on, y'all. All right, much better. Runner's privilege, right, Mom? Shout out to my parents. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting with things. Like, the other trails, both the PCT and the CDT, they have roadwalk alternatives, and depending on the weather and the year and a bunch of different factors, sometimes it's more advantageous to not stay on what they call the red line, which is like, when a purist is attempting to do one of these trails. And I've had the purist experience. That was what I did in 2019. I walked every mile and every inch of the Appalachian Trail from start to finish. And that was cool. I'm glad that I did that and was able to show myself that I could do that. And then in 2022, I started to deviate a little bit, and I think it was probably, it's hard for me to imagine. It might have been, I think I've already mentioned it before, but I think it was the Shenandoahs in Virginia. So maybe, it's hard for me to believe that I stayed on trail for the first 800 miles without any kind of deviations or road walks, but perhaps I did. And so, when I was in the Shenandoahs, there was a certain day where I really, really wanted to get to a wayside so that I could get like a little bit of a resupply and maybe an adult beverage, but it was going to be a 30-mile day or something like that, and there was no way. I'd woken up too late to be able to do that and manage it on trail. But then I was looking at the logistics, and I was like, whoa, if I road walk, like it's shorter and less elevation gain, and plus, I can walk, nearly 4 miles an hour on the road. And so it was definitely a field of victory. I managed to get to the wayside before they closed and got all of the goodies that I wanted, and still had an awesome day, road walking. I do enjoy road walking, and now that I have better shoes to do it with, that gives me a lot of confidence about choosing to do that as an alternative for the Smokies. But yeah, I think I understand why the Appalachian Trail doesn't have those kinds of alternatives, It's just not really that kind of a trail for whatever reason. If it's purely just posterity, it's never been that way, and so it's not that way still, or whatever it might be. But, as someone who especially just finished that bike ride, I feel like I'm making excuses. I do enjoy going off the beaten path when it's advantageous to me. you know, it was kind of equal parts stressful and relieving to be on the bike ride, because it was just like I could go in whatever direction was just most advantageous, and it wasn't a matter of like having to follow kind of a strict, like there was no consequence. In fact, there was only reward for deviating from any given path if I determined that something else would be better for a different reason. And I guess at this point, with the Appalachian Trail, I am deciding that it would be beneficial to deviate and avoid the Smokies, and then catch back up with it on the north side of where the Smokies end, which would be closer to the hot springs area of North Carolina. And so, I mean, maybe I'll even, I don't know, I need to do more research, and that's kind of what I think I'll kind of be doing today, because it might just be generally more beneficial for me to aim for hot springs rather than just like the very end of the Appalachian Trail that goes through the Smokies, because I'd imagine hot springs is a much lower elevation, and I think by the time I would get there, perhaps some of the bad weather will have passed, and maybe we can get back to these like 50s, 60s, 70-degree days. It's funny because, you know, again, I have no intention of stopping wholesale this whole thing. Like, this isn't any kind of like wrench in the system that actually means total system failure. This is just like a recalculation based on current information, given all of the factors and variables that I value and find important. So yeah, I like the idea of that. Again, the fun part, you know, I'm not looking forward to having to stealth camp again, but the fun part about hiking parallel to the trail when I decide to go off of it is that eventually when I do rejoin it, all of the logistics get really, really easy again, you know. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting with things at this point, and I guess I feel like I pretty much have decided. I think that the road walk is going to be the best idea, and especially, again, if I'm under the weather, it gives me easier bailout points, and since this area is generally familiar with thru hikers, you know, it'd be easy to get a hitch to go somewhere, and there's plenty of options for cheap lodging if it comes to that or whatever. But yeah, my dude, that's about it. I think this is as far as my thought loop was getting before it would just restart without any kind of feeling of resolution. So I guess that is my resolution for now. I'm going to head back to the NOC, take it easy, hang out by the river, check out this stealth camping area, see if it's viable, and we'll plan for I guess a Saturday morning embarking onto the road, which I actually think will be pretty cool. This area is like very pretty with the Nantahala River and the mountains that are kind of surrounding it. You know, Nantahala itself seems like it's a bit of in a valley, and I've never walked the road that goes north from there, whereas I have done the Smokies multiple times. So, you know, there's a point there for novelty as well. If a big part of this pursuit is the pursuit of novelty, and if that is something I'm optimizing for, then that means that doing something that I haven't done before should yield results that are unexpected and possibly better than what I could do if I stayed on trail proper. So, yeah, we'll see how things turn out, but that's my plan for now, and I generally will say that I'm sticking to it. And with that, I suppose I'm going to have another cup of coffee. I'm just kind of taking it easy this morning, taking it slow, and yeah, I'll get back to you later tonight and see how things have kind of solidified since now. All right. Thanks for listening. Love you. Bye.